Hi, I'm Pranami and you're watching Pages of the Globe. So if you know my channel, essentially I read short stories and poems, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the author. I'll tell you about past publications, what made them famous, their bringing up, their childhood, things like that. And then after the story, I'll give you an in-depth analysis. I'll talk to you about the themes, the motifs present, anything really. And you can use it on any school assignment you want, or, if you just want to listen to it for fun, whatever it may be. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. So I do want to give a quick disclaimer, because for the end of this video speaking part, which should go on for another maybe 8 minutes, there you will be hearing my laptop running, the fan running, because my laptop is constantly overheating. So unfortunately, that is something you will be hearing. But if you don't want to hear about the author at all, you totally don't have to. Just go ahead and keep pressing the skip button until you see the screen has completely changed. And that's when I'll be reading the story. So the short story that I'll be reading today is called The Flowers by Alice Walker. And it follows the story of this young girl named Maya, as she is exploring just the beauty of the natural world around her house or her cabin. It begins as a very simple, carefree journey, but gradually, it very much shifts in tone, and I would say it's a pretty powerful story. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the author. So Alice Walker was born on February 9th, 1944 in Georgia. And she grew up in this very small town, and it very much affected, it was very affected by racial segregation. She was the youngest of 8 children in a sharecropping family, and so she very much also grew up experiencing the harsh realities of just poverty and systemic racism, and it shaped a lot of her adult life, and she's written a lot about it as well, I would say. So she earned a scholarship to Spelman College, and she later transferred to Sarah Lawrence College in New York. After graduating, she became involved in the civil rights movement, working in Georgia and Mississippi during the 1960s. As for her major works and accomplishments, she is probably best known for her major Pulitzer Award and National Book Award-winning novel, The Color Purple, published in 1982, which has become a landmark in American literature. She's also published many pieces of poetry, essays, and several other novels and short stories, including In Love and Trouble, published in 1973, which is the collection that The Flowers appears in. As for her legacy, she is celebrated for her contributions to African American literature and feminist thought, particularly in developing the concept of womanism, which is a form of feminism that centers Black women's experiences. Her work often explores things like race, gender, identity, and the legacy of oppression in America, and she remains an influential voice in literature and social justice activism. Now, this specific short story, The Flowers, has to do with just the trauma of systemic racism, and it very much forces the reader, as the reader, to very much come to terms with whatever has happened post Jim Crow era, post Construction era. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next. The Flowers by Alice Walker. It seemed to Mayop, as she skipped lightly from henhouse to pigpen to smokehouse, that the days had never been as beautiful as these. The air held a keenness that made her nose twitch. The harvesting of the corn and cotton and peanuts and squash made each day a golden surprise that caused excited little tremors to run up her jaws. Mayop carried a short, knobby stick. She struck out at random at chickens she liked and worked out the beat of a song on the fence around the pig pen. She felt light and good in the warm sun. She was 10, and nothing existed for her but her song, the stick clutched in her dark brown hand, and the ta-ti-ta-ta of an accompaniment. Turning her back on the rusty boards of her family's sharecropper cabin, Myop walked along the fence till it ran into the stream made by the spring. Around the spring, where the family got drinking water, silver ferns and wildflowers grew. Along the shallow banks, pigs rooted. Myop watched the tiny white bubbles disrupt the thin black scale of soil and the water that silently rose and slid away down the stream. She'd explored the woods behind the house many times. Often in late autumn, her mother took her to gather nuts among the fallen leaves. Today she made her own path, bouncing this way and that way, vaguely keeping an eye out for snakes. She found, in addition to the various common but pretty ferns and leaves, an armful of strange blue flowers with velvety ridges and a sweet suds bush full of the brown, fragrant buds. By 12 o'clock, her arms laden with sprigs of her finding, she was a mile or more from home. She had often been as far as before, but the strangeness of the land made it not as pleasant as her usual hunts. It seemed gloomy in the little cove in which she found herself. The air was damp, the silence close and deep. Myop began to circle back to the house, back to the peacefulness of the morning. It was then she stepped back smack into his eyes. Her heel became lodged in the broken ridge between brow and nose, and she reached down quickly, unafraid to free herself. It was only when she saw his naked grin that she gave a little yelp of surprise. He had been a tall man. From feet to neck covered a long space. His head lay beside him. When she pushed back the leaves and the layers of earth and debris, Myop saw that he had large white teeth, all of them cracked or broken, long fingers and very big bones. All of his clothes had rotted away except some threads of blue denim from his overalls. The buckles of the overall had turned green. Myop gazed around the spot with interest. Very near where she'd stepped into the head was a wild pink rose. As she picked it to add to her bundle, she noticed a raised mound, a ring around the rose's root. It was the rotted remains of a noose, a bit of shredding plow line, and now blending benignly into the soil. Around an overhanging limb of a great spreading oak clung another piece, frayed, rotted, bleached, and frazzled, barely there, but spinning restlessly in the breeze. Myop laid down her flowers, and the summer was over. The end. Alright, so that was The Flowers by Alice Walker. Now, this is a flash fiction piece, first published in 1973, and it essentially just follows a young African-American girl by the name Myop, who, in the beginning, she's like very joyfully exploring the world around her, but then she kind of almost stumbles upon this like very horrifying corpse. It's a lynching victim skeleton. And so the shift from the story to this like very innocent joyfulness, maybe even naivety, to like this very grim reality is very sharp, and there is a lot of like meaning behind this, message behind this, so let's get into it. So first, I want to start off with a character study. Normally, I think I start off with like themes and symbols, but I want to jump straight into the character study first of just Myop because I want to talk about what she really represents. So she is this 10-year-old black girl, and she represents a lot of just childhood innocence, freedom, and unawareness. At the start, she's very like carefree, and she's singing, she's exploring the nature around her, near her family's cabin, and she's very symbolic of what I would say is the next generation, right? She is this kid that's growing up with very limited awareness of the brutality that shaped the lives of those who came before her. So you might be wondering, her name is a little bit different. Actually, when I started recording the story, I read it wrong so many times, I had to keep restarting. Her name, Myop, can be, it's like shorthand, I think, as for myopia, which is nearsightedness. And that could, symbolically point to her innocence or, her inability to see the horrors of the past until she literally steps into it, right? So what is some symbolism we see? Well, the flowers, right? That's the central motif in the story. It's also the title. So at first, Mayop is kind of picking them very carelessly and right joyfully. This is just, at first, flowers are like symbols of life. They're symbols of growth. They're symbols of beauty. But then, when she accidentally stumbles into the dead man, she lays the flowers down. So then they are shifting, right? That's a shift. Now they're more an act of like, they turn into an act. The act of putting the flowers down, that's an act of mourning. That's an act of loss, awakening. So this kind of represents how now Mayop is recognizing, the suffering and injustice, and the moment, that is the exact moment she transitions from innocence to knowledge. So what is this dead body, right? The skeleton that she finds that it still has the noose around its neck, which is, I think, a very, very powerful symbol of just America's legacy with racial violence. I mean, the noose is an unmistakable reference to lynching, which was, if you didn't know, it was a method of racial terror used against African Americans in the post-Reconstruction and Jim Crow eras. And this body, I mean, it's very decayed, right? And so it suggests that, it's been a long time since this act has happened. However, at the end of the day, the body is still there. It's still present. And that is symbolic of the trauma of the past being still there. It's present, right? Now, I also want to talk a little bit about the setting. I'm going to say this also has symbolism in it, because the progression of, like, where she starts her journey from to where she ends it, that's reflecting of her symbolic journey. So she starts around the hen house, right? And then later walks into the woods. So this movement from safety, because, the hen house is close to her house, she's been there multiple times. So this movement from the safety area to the unknown woods kind of shows her, like, I don't want to say psychological journey, but because psychological makes it sound a little, like, almost creepy, but, like, just her journey symbolically. So nature begins as very welcoming, but it slowly turns into, like, something that's a little bit more dark, more symbolic of the hidden histories. So what are some themes we see here? Obviously, right off the bat, the first one we see is this is like coming of age, loss of innocence. This is the central theme of the story, right? She begins the day as a child and then ends it as someone who has been, I would assume, very changed by what she has seen. I mean, she is being confronted with the very harsh reality of racial violence. Another theme we see here is like just racial history, and the author really draws attention to the, like, often unspoken but always there legacy of violence against African Americans. The lynched man, we don't know his name. He wasn't even given, like, a really proper burial or anything, and he is decomposed. We don't know anything about him. We don't even know if his family knows him. And he represents countless real victims whose lives have been erased or forgotten. So this story is like almost a form of this style called literary witness. And it just forces both, the character, obviously, like Mayop, but also us as a reader to really confront this history and understand it, I guess. I want to give my own interpretation of the ending, right? So the final sentence is, and the summer was over. That's very stark, it's very like ambiguous, it's vague, you don't really know. I would say it's marking, yes, the end of a season, obviously, but it's specifically there for the symbolic end of, like, innocence and childhood, right? I would say another thing that it could possibly represent is just how unfortunately, Black children, specifically Black children and perhaps people of color in America, just often lose their innocence very early due to, like, the exposure of the systemic violence and trauma that is faced by their communities. I mean, oftentimes as younger kids, especially if you're a person of color, you often have to deal with facing not just like people being racist against you. That's a totally separate thing. However, you also have to deal with like learning about the history of your ancestors and how painful it was for them. Like, I can't even imagine how awful it must be for someone who's like 8, 9, 10 years old, sitting in history class learning about the awful things that their ancestors had to go through. I mean, I don't think I learned, anything about, as an Indian American, I don't think I really learned anything about what the country of India and what the people in India had to go through when the British came to, colonize them and imperialize them. I didn't learn about that until, I would say, like, properly about what truly went down until literally maybe when I was like 15, 16. So by then, first of all, not only had I been exposed to the reality of the world anyway, I was able to, process that much better than I would say, some little kid who until then probably didn't even know that racial violence is a thing and it exists. I want to talk a little bit about the intent that Alice Walker had. She has been known for exploring the intersections of race, gender, trauma, and heritage. And she often writes about the lives of Black women and girls. And I would say in the short story, she really condenses those themes into a very beautiful piece. And this story really brings us in as readers and forces us, especially those of us that are shielded from racial realities, to truly acknowledge the pain that has shaped specifically African American life in America. That is it for today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next.